Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my weekly entertainment wrap-up for May 19th through 25th. This week I read 3 books, I watched 1 show, I watched 2 movies, and I listened to 1 book. I'm home again. This feels so rare these days, but from here on out it's probably gonna be home. I mean, obviously occasionally I'll go other places, but I'm done pet sitting is what I'm saying. Speaking of, a book I read a lot of while I had a dog just sitting in my lap, chilling out, was She Started It. This book is basically about 5 characters. 4 of them were friends in school and they were really mean to this other one character. However, one day they all get invitations telling them that they're invited to her bridal shower because she's getting married and she wants them to be like maids of honor or whatever it's called. Bridesmaids, that's what it is. They're like, this is kind of weird, we haven't seen her in like 10 years, why would she even invite us? We weren't even really friends. But also it's an all-expenses paid luxury vacation to this island that's very secluded. It's like its own little personal isolated island in the Caribbean, and they're like, yeah, okay. And when we start out, we don't know exactly what these 4 women did to this woman 10 years ago, but we know it wasn't good. And now they're all trapped on an island together, so let's see how that goes. I called the twist in this pretty far ahead of time. However, I did want to keep seeing what exactly went down, what they did to this person, and exactly what's going to end up happening on the island itself. So if you're not opposed to reading books where you're like, yeah, I know exactly where this is going, but you want to keep going anyway, this is one to pick up in that genre. Next, I picked up Liberated, The Radical Art and Life of Claude Cahun. This is a book that is a graphic novel made by somebody I actually follow here on YouTube. Their name is Rowe. And they casually mentioned it in a video a while ago and I was like, oh yeah, I should put a hold on that because my library has it, so why not? And then I get it and realize that this historical figure spent a lot of time in France and on Jersey, which are places that I just was, so it would have been nice to know about this figure before I went. But that's fine. It was kind of cool to look at this and be like, hey, I've been to these places. Kathy from editing here. Even the brewery on Jersey is called Liberation Brewing Co. So yeah, Liberated, perfect title for this. Claude Cahun, and I have no idea if I'm saying that last name right, is actually the stage name for this person who in the synopsis or the explanation of the book is actually talked about as a lesbian non-binary person, but the book didn't actually get into that aspect of whether or not this person identified that way, so I'm like, okay, sure. I believe you, the book didn't get in there. However, this artist really liked to play with gender. This artist was really into theater stuff, and then their partner was into photography, and they often melded that together. However, just prior to the Second World War happening, they actually decided they wanted to move out of Paris because things were getting a little bit weird there, and they moved to Jersey, which, if you know your history, they were also occupied, so that was not a good time. However, they spent their whole time writing these notes, basically telling the German soldiers that they should stop the war, and they were found out, and they were sentenced to death because of it. However, that's not how the story ended, so if you're intrigued, I definitely suggest checking this one out. The final book I read with my eyeballs is a debut called The Road to Heaven. This takes place in the 1960s in Toronto, and the author calls it a maple noir. So it's Canadian, and it's kind of like one of those old noir detective films, because that's exactly what's going on. This is a detective. As we meet him, he's working on this divorce case, and then the next day he's working on this case where he is trying to track down this missing 16-year-old girl. However, while he's speaking to people who know her or may have seen her, he starts unraveling a completely different mystery that she is also working on, and it gets complicated from there. For the most part, I enjoyed my time with this. However, there were sections of it that were just a little bit overwritten for me, and then there was at least one thing near the beginning of the book where it made me actually stop and brought me out of the book because I was like, I know what you were going for with this sentence, but that's not a thing. And I think the phrase was squared archway, and I was like, what? You can have it one way or you can have it the other, or you could just call it a door like everybody else, because he was going through this like either door or opening in a house from one room to another. You can't have a squared archway. That's what? I imagine if I was more familiar with Toronto, I would have gotten even more out of this because it really did talk about these different locations that he was at and what was being built at the time frame, and then these like different highways he had to cross and those types of things. If you were really familiar with the area, I'm sure it would be a lot of fun. There were only a few locations that I was like, yes, I've been there, but you know, I've spent maybe a week in Toronto my entire life, so it's not exactly a location I know super well. That being said, if you're looking for a debut detective book and you want it set in Canada in the 60s, this is the book for you. As for the one show we watched 3 episodes from the 2nd season of Doctor Who, because the streaming service we were watching it on actually got rid of it, which was super annoying, made us think that we were not going to be able to continue watching it, and then we realized that our roommate actually has it, so we were like, cool, we can continue watching it. Out of those 3 episodes, one of them was the one that we watched last night, and it was actually the beginning of a 2-parter, and had I known that, I probably would have just waited off, because I kind of wanted to continue, but also it was midnight, and I had to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning to do this for you, so here we are. I knew by most of the way through the episode there was no way it wasn't a 2-parter, but it would have been nice to know that ahead of time. Here's the thing, I like the silly antics, I like the banter between people, however, some of the characters are just written so poorly, especially characters who happen to be women. They're just written to be really combative with each other, and like, I'm not like other girls, and I'm the special one, and it's not my favorite. I'm just like, these are great characters, why are they written this way? As for movies I watched, we watched Stuber, which is about this Uber driver named Stu, who gets commandeered by this guy who should not be driving right now because he's just had laser eye surgery. And it turns out this guy is a cop, although he's been told to take some annual leave because, you know, the whole eye surgery thing, but he's got this lead to solve this case that he's been working on for 2 years. So basically he commandeers Stu, makes Stu drive him all around the city while he's trying to track down this bad guy, and hilarious things ensue. Because obviously this is a weird situation, these are 2 very different types of humans, they've both got different things going on in their lives, and yeah, it's action, it's comedy, it's what I wanted out of it. The other movie I picked up is because I had an evening to myself where I was like, I can watch a movie, cool, and I was flicking through these different things, and I got to the horror section, I saw one that was starring Toni Collette, and I was like, firstly, I always thought her name is Toni Collette, but I'm pretty sure it's Toni Collette when I looked at the spelling of it, and I was like, oh, okay, whatever. Anyway, I saw her on the cover of it, and I was like, sold, whatever this is, and that movie was Hereditary. This movie is about this woman, played by Toni, who is the daughter of a woman who has just recently passed, and she has a little bit of grief to do with that, because this woman wasn't really nice consistently through her years, and you kind of really get that sense while she's giving the eulogy for her mother. And then later when you see her in grief counseling, you see what her mother's life was like and how it is very complicated, and how she can be grieving this person who is really complicated to love, and how she doesn't want to bring that grief back home to her family. It turns out that there are a few different mental health issues in the family, and as we're watching this film, we also see her husband and her 2 kids. There is one moment of foreshadowing that made me go, yes, this one kid is going to have a medical emergency at some point. However, that whole situation was way more traumatic than I expected. Let me just put it there. Especially, not only the situation itself, what happened while trying to get help, but then the aftermath of it. If you've seen this movie, you know what I'm talking about. As you're going through this movie, you're really trying to figure out if a mental break is happening or if there is something to what her mother was always going on about, and whether or not the something she was always going on about actually explains the mental health issues in the family, if that makes any sense. I'm not a mental health provider, and I haven't done a deep dive into exactly all the things in this movie, so I don't know how to deal with that representation aspect, because I know it's not usually done very well. But what I can tell you is I watched this right before going to sleep, which was a bad choice because I definitely had Hereditary related dreams. As for the audiobook I listened to this week, that was The House of Eve. I don't know who recommended this because I watched so many different people, and if they say a book that sounds even vaguely interesting, I'll see if the library has an audiobook copy of it, and if they do, I'll put a hold on it, and then by the time I get it, I have no idea where the recommendation came from. Also, besides the fact that I knew this was historical fiction focusing on Black women, I had no idea what this was going into it. I don't usually do trigger warnings because I'm always scared I'm going to forget a trigger warning when I'm saying them, and I'm one of those people where if I can't do it perfectly, I don't want to do it, and I just want to point you to places where you can get trigger warnings, which is always down in the comments below. However, if you're going to pick this one up, definitely know that the trigger warnings include pregnancy, loss of a child, miscarriage, things to do with children in the foster system. It has a lot to do with children eventually. This book is split into 2 perspectives of 2 women who don't know each other. One of them is Ruby. She is going to this very advanced program to try to get a scholarship so she can be the first in her family to actually go to university. However, she's finding it difficult to actually get to her classes because her mother is supposed to leave her car fare, and when she doesn't leave car fare, she gets there late, and when she gets there late, it looks badly on her and she might get kicked out of the program and not get the scholarship. The other perspective is this woman that's in college and she has to hustle in order to actually be there. Her mom actually worked a second job to get her to college, and now that she's at college, she herself is not only working really hard at the academic side, but she also has a job in the college library. This means, much to the chagrin of her roommate, she doesn't really go out all that often, but occasionally she will actually get her out of the house. And on this one random night out, she happens to see this guy she sees in the library all the time and thinks it's really fine, and that situation goes from there. I spent a decent amount of time not knowing the synopsis of the book, trying to figure out how these two lives were going to intersect at some point, and eventually I got around to figuring that out, but it wasn't until a lot of things happened in each of their lives, so I'm not going to let you know what those are now. Just go into this book, read it yourself. Assuming that you're fine with any of the triggers I mentioned and any of the triggers that are mentioned on much more reputable locations for finding trigger warnings. I thought this was phenomenally written. I was right there with these characters experiencing these different things, and it just shows another social system that everybody thinks is just fine and rosy and doing great things until you see kind of the scheming behind it, and it's just so insidious. That's it for this week. If you've read, watched, or listened to any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down in the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!